All right, everyone? Hey, thanks so much for joining here. My name is Kurt Reedy, and I am with the enterprise sales team here at Classy. Appreciate everyone joining us here this afternoon. Today, we're going to be doing a panel discussion on understanding the 360-degree view of your network. So the purpose of this here is we're going to take a look at how some leading orgs are implementing a more effective way to manage supporter relationships and engagement. So that being said, I'm going to quickly introduce Gene over to Appirio and also Blake over at American Cancer Society. So we'll break about 10 minutes before this wraps up here to do some Q&A. But that being said, I'll let you gentlemen take it away.
Great. Thanks very much. Hi all, my name is Gene Zeiger. I'm with Appirio. Appirio is a services company. We work with organizations, nonprofit organizations, as well as for-profit corporations, large and small, and have the pleasure and really excited to be talking today with Blake Sanders, and our customer at American Cancer Society. And Blake, maybe we can start out with, would love for you to just kind of tell us a little bit about American Cancer Society. We know American Cancer Society, but what you do, and just in general, what your focus is.
Okay. It's great to be here, everybody. I'm Blake Sanders. Been with the American Cancer Society for a little over 4 years, and I am the head of the information technology department there, and have been for the past year. And IT within American Cancer Society really is our focus is to ensure that the American Cancer Society and its constituents are connected, and our mission is brought forward in such a way that we're able to save lives, celebrate lives, and lead the fight for a world without cancer. And American Cancer Society today is now a 105-year-old organization. Been around a long time, and some of you might think, halfway jokingly, if you're 105 years old, why is cancer still around? But it's a very tough battle, and one that we are making strides against. Today, some of the numbers are, while quite staggering, also tell a really good story. In 2017 alone, the projection is that nearly 1.7 million people will hear the words, "You have cancer." But in today's world, that's no longer necessarily a death sentence. The rise in statistics is such that mortality rates are better than they've ever been before. The big scare for women, breast cancer, 5-year survivor rate is now 90%. And the big one for us guys, prostate cancer, 5-year survivor rate is now 99%, nearly 100%. If diagnosed at an early stage, localized, after 5 years, are still survivors. And it gets better as years goes by, of course. But we're making a lot of strides on that mission, essentially to ensure that cancer really just kind of becomes a chronic disease, and not the epidemic that it is today. So that's essentially ACS in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, that's great. So in preparation for this meeting, we were talking, so I think the discussion topic is barbecue. So we're going to talk about barbecue.
360-degree barbecue.
So the topic is supporter networks and getting a 360-degree view. But figured we'd start out today, but maybe talking a little bit about what does a supporter mean? Like, what is the definition of a supporter in general from your perspective?
Yeah, so that's going to vary based on your organization. For instance, the typical relationship with supporter tends to be financial, but if my mission was to do cleanup in local parks in my neighborhood, that's not a financial transaction. My supporters need to be volunteers. There's very little money involved, right? Most people think that American Cancer Society is actually a research organization, in which case our supporter relationship would be fundraiser to researcher. But in fact, we do a lot more than just research. We have several mission programs, one of which is something called Hope Lodge. There's one here in Boston in partnership with AstraZeneca, where think of it like a hospital hotel. So patients who are not from the area, who their cancer treatment center is nearby, might need a place to stay. And Hope Lodge provides them a place to stay during their lifetime of their treatment, in some cases as many as 6 weeks for some cancer patients. And that's a mission program that we provide, and supporters in that context is much more than financial, because we look for volunteer help wherever we can. Our team alone within IT volunteers at our local Hope Lodge in both caregiving, but also just in day-to-day life. But it doesn't really stop there either. We also have another program called Road to Recovery, where a cancer patient might live near their treatment center, so they don't necessarily need a place to stay, but they might need a ride to their treatment and back, because they really can't drive themselves after getting their medication. So Road to Recovery marries a volunteer driver who can give them a ride to their treatment center to someone who needs one, in which case that supporter relationship is patient to driver. Then we also have the typical supporters that you might expect: donors, also those that fundraise on behalf of somebody they might have affinity to, like their relative who has cancer. But then we also, as American Cancer Society is a nationwide organization, we have some 400 offices across the United States, and we need supporters in the community in order to allow for really what brought us to be, which was a community-led organization. We need those connections. So one of our supporter types essentially is a leadership volunteer, and those are the people that sit on one of our 46 regional market area boards to help us connect up with locals in the communities and so forth, so that we can maintain kind of that community-led aspect, while in fact the world is changing, right? Because we're a nationwide organization, and we have changed quite a bit over the past 105 years. And then of course, corporate supporters is also very important for us, and that relationship is more of a business-to-business one. We have quite a few corporate partners that we deal with, as well as supporters in among other industries, such as the entertainment industry, such as the sporting industry, and so forth. But one supporter type that's often overlooked is the workforce, the employee.
Right.
We as employees and workers in the American Cancer Society are connected to the mission just as much as any supporter would be, and in fact try to lead the way wherever possible, and that's something we'll probably talk about in a second.
Yeah, in fact, maybe we transition to that for a moment.
Sure.
So we at Appirio are real believers in a lot of organizations, a lot of customers spend and have been spending quite a bit of money and effort and energy into what we deem to be customer or constituent experience, right? Mm-hmm. And it's really front-end focused, really focused on the donor in most cases, right? But let's talk about the worker. We believe that a lot of the happiness and excitement and really the opportunity in working together is really created by the worker experience, and there's a cycle where enabling your workers is almost as important, if not the more important, than enabling your constituents. What do you feel about that?
It's highly encouraged inside of our organization, and it's also something that we try to renew and vigor wherever we can, because if you think about it, since we're such an old organization, we have many employees that are 20 plus, 30 plus years, sometimes 40 years in the organization.
Yeah.
And having to do the same thing over and over, year in, year out, can really be kind of draining. So what we try to do with the young talent coming in is getting them paired up with some of our long-term employees, and build new teams, and really kind of live the mission. So one of the biggest things that we do is for our fundraising is an event called Relay for Life. Right. Relay for Life there's 5,000 of these across the nation, with some 2 to 3 million participants, and it's generally a fundraising event for all those mission programs I was talking about earlier. But we within our corporate office try to essentially compete on that scale, right?
Right.
So I've got a team, a relay team called IT Cures, which often, whenever we're going around our track, because it's a walk event, right? It's a 12-hour walk event. We'll go around the track for 12 hours, hold a little sign, it says IT Cures, but everybody says it cures. Well, okay, no, but and that team 5 years ago really only generated maybe $5,000 worth of revenue, which when you look at the entirety of Relay is not a lot. This is a program that generates, you know, $250 million a year in revenue. So we wanted to really be at the front of that. So we spent the next several years working on how can we as a corporate team actually try to shine as much as any volunteer team could. So the next 3 years we started working on, well, we could do some sub events. We run a gala and we do barbecues. We were talking about barbecue just a second ago. Every quarter we come in. It always comes back to barbecue. We sell barbecue in the building and everything else. But you know, after that, last year, I think it was a 2016 team, was the first time that a global headquarters team had become one of the top 10 relay teams in the nation, number 7.
Awesome.
Earning over $156,000 a year, or that year, and so then that was the team just before I took over IT, and I can tell you, the goal to hit that revenue was just as high as any other goal that I had in the because I mean that was self-inflicted, right?
Sure.
I wanted to be able to do just as well as my predecessor did. And so we're on track now to almost hit that. I think we're going to hit 125,000 this year and be maybe around number 9 or 10. But I mean, I'm sweating that out, right? as if that was the most important thing. But it is important.
It's important.
Right?
It's important.
So yeah, that workforce engagement is huge because, you know, then you can come tell that story to really anybody that's thinking about how do I engage,
right,
you know, a fundraising team in that fashion. And you know, there's a lot of incentive there within the corporation to do that.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So, you know, we in the nonprofit world, though, you know, getting people excited about the mission, probably not our biggest problem necessarily, right? A lot of people that join our organizations are passionate, etc., right? But let's get down, you know, we've been talking about the business and the program side of things. Let's talk about technology, right? Because now when we get in, it's one thing to have passionate, excited employees, right? But it's another thing to actually enable those people to, in a much more efficient and productive way, get them to support that mission, if you would, right? And also, it's one thing to do it, and maybe it's the same just on a smaller scale, but it's one thing to do it for an agile 20, 30 person organization. It's another thing to do it for American Cancer Society. Right. Would love to get your perspective on the technology, you know, considerations and what you think about when you think about technology decisions, and maybe even get into your NAV tools sort of initiative as we start talking.
So I can tell you, I kind of wish I had a 30 person
nonprofit.
You can turn that ship a lot quicker than you can with one that is so large and old as ACS. So American Cancer Society, you know, its roots are community-led organizations, right? And a collection of community-led organizations that aren't necessarily traditionally talking to each other. At one point in time, there were 54 corporations. American Cancer Society of Boston, American Cancer Society of Florida, et cetera. And over time, they started to consolidate, and it really as early as 6 years ago, there were still 13 of them, different corporations as divisions in the United States, all with their own IT, all with their own, you know, CFO group and operations, et cetera. And 6 years ago, we decided to transform that into one corporate entity. And that one corporate entity is global headquartered in Atlanta and is just the American Cancer Society. So all those other corporations were dissolved and formed divisions inside ACS. So that alone was a huge help because, you know, while the information wasn't necessarily siloed, we did have divisional separations within our data we have a 14-year-old install of Siebel that's way over customized to the point where it can't be upgraded. And a 13-year-old implementation of Lawson that's similarly over customized and can't be integrated. But at least I've got one set of data.
Right.
Which, that alone is something. So we, after we consolidated down into one corporation and started to rationalize some of our older applications down into kind of a core set of enterprise applications, we found we were down to about 150 applications and realized there's no way that we can continue rationalizing without modernizing.
Right.
And so we went down the path last year to try to understand what could we do with our main CRM and our main financial system. Could we upgrade in place? Could we rebuild that or whatever? And really came to the conclusion that it was not something that we could just simply upgrade, because there were too many needs for the company to continue changing, that we just essentially needed to completely bring in another platform, and which led us to something we call the navigational tools project. And so our strategy kind of took on, for whatever reason, a nautical theme, where when you start looking at the overall multi-year strategy, we're gonna fill the sails and we're gonna chart the course, right? And that's how the ship gets where it needs to go. But underneath all that was something that we called navigational tools. And navigational tools really was our core technology, which is the Siebel and Lawson and the other things that I just mentioned. And so we took a hard look at how to change that. And so navigational tools became a technology modernization project, but wrapped in a business transformation.
Right.
So it's just much a business transformation as it is just changing technology.
Yeah.
So we went all the way down to look at what business processes were we actually serving with all of this technology, and how do we, look at a future state of that's actually more standardized, more best practice. So then we can put a technology stack on top of that is not over customized and too difficult to operate. So that became Salesforce, and really almost everything that Salesforce is, right? Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, Marketing Cloud, etc. With Classy on top of that as our sort of a platform for realization of what our kind of our do-it-yourself events look like, and then soon to be our more corporatized events like Relay and whatnot. And then on the financial side, we ditched Lawson and went to NetSuite with some peripheral applications on top of that, like Adaptive for budgeting, Coupa for source to pay, and Concur for travel and expense. And so all this becomes an integrated ecosystem.
Right.
And so integration was a big part of that, and we wanted to do it in such a way that it was standardized and modern, so that we take ourselves away from a batch enterprise and into more of a real-time enterprise, specifically so that we can take all of those different supporter roles and connect them.
Right.
Because that one donor could also be a patient, who also becomes a volunteer, who also might, through that journey, then want to help another patient as a cancer survivor network partner and help them through their journey. And all of these things become connected and capable inside of this one ecosystem.
Yep.
Before, all of the peripheral systems that enabled us to provide those services were not connected. So Cancer Survivor Network, where a former patient, a survivor, can actually help a current patient, completely separated. Road to Recovery, which is the ride-sharing program, completely separated, et cetera. So all of this now becomes integrated, and we can follow what that supporter is doing across all of the aspects of their roles, and then help tailor the experience. I don't want to get ahead of myself here. Help tailor the experience to exactly what they're doing.
But that's really the goal in many ways, right? When we talk about supporter networks and we talk about 360-degree view, you know, it sounds kind of fluffy and high level, right? But if you take it down to the practical nature of what we're trying to do, that's really exactly it, right? Is the supporter is potentially someone who plays many roles with your organization, right? And what we're trying to get to is one way to look at all of the interactions that your organization has with that individual.
Yeah, and I have a real world example. I mean, okay, so I'm approaching 50. And
it happens.
And it's kind of time to start thinking about colorectal cancer. So, so if I go to cancer.org, so cancer.org is our main web property that contains close to now 15,000 documents that we curate and keep up to date about really any aspect of cancer, cancer prevention, early detection, treatment options, etc. All that stuff is available on cancer.org, or you can call our National Cancer Information Center and ask the questions, and then they go look up the documents for you. But if I go search cancer.org today for colorectal cancer, I'll get tons of documents, and I'll be able to search them and read them and print them out and do whatever I want to do with them. But tomorrow, if I go back to cancer.org, it doesn't remember that I was there. It presents the same front page to me. I got to go research again. I got to go, etc. And so if I'm in an ecosystem where all of my interactions are handled or kept inside of my customer master, it's going to know Blake was on cancer.org, just searched colorectal cancer. Now I can provide tailored content to him, but also if it also knows my donor history or my event participation history, it can serve up, hey, by the way, there's a colorectal cancer roundtable in your area, it's in your community, it's over here, or here's a volunteer opportunity, or oh, by the way, we're running an event and might need your help, there's a gala coming up, etc.
Right.
If I call NCIC, they can have that same information inside a Service Cloud and say, oh, I see you were just at the website, well, let me help you here's a document that's probably too big to print, I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
All of that becomes possible inside this ecosystem,
right,
when you've got a 360-degree view of your supporter.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And so if you think about, like, put yourself out a year or two from now, right? And this overall initiative, which is enormous. I mean, this is a big change, as you said, not just technologically, but a big change from a business process perspective for ACS, right? So so it's a year from now, you look back and say, wow, that was a wild success, right?
Yeah.
What are other than that, right, the ability for everyone to have a good view into the system and get a sense for all the interactions, what else did we do really well? How did we execute?
Well, I mean, a supporter needs to understand their impact. They need to understand, there needs to be a transparency. So if I am the volunteer supporter, how many rides have I done? How many people have I touched?
Yes.
If I'm a financial supporter, how many Hope Lodge nights did my donation enable?
Right.
What grants that actually were initiated as a result of my help, etc. And beyond that, a lot of fundraising options open up that we don't have today. Today we're kind of rigid in our structure. You're either going to do a relay, or you're going to do a Strides event, which is our breast cancer walk, or you might do something else we call DIY, but it's not fully defined yet. And tomorrow that becomes a much easier prospect, because I, as a fundraiser, might want to do barbecue sales once a week instead of once a quarter, and allow for that to flow into the maybe a larger event type and so forth. If you guys were at the morning keynote yesterday, before it got really too hot, Scott had a story, right? And the story was he and some friends wanted to do a pub crawl to benefit cancer. Well, what you might not know or didn't hear was that pub crawl was to benefit American Cancer Society, and they called American Cancer Society and said, we're going to do this event, how do we engage with you? And they said, join a relay.
Right.
And they're like, I don't want to do that.
So
they ended up, to his credit, they ended up joining a relay, walking around the track once, handing in their money and leaving.
Right.
But we shouldn't have to do that, right? So we want to provide a choice for anyone to engage with us. if it's a financial supporter, to get engaged in any way they want to.
Right.
And decide, well, is this general funds? Is it going to go to breast cancer research? Do I want to support Hope Lodge or whatever? Direct the money where they want to direct it, and know that it got there, and get the impact back, and say, yeah, this is what your money did for us.
Right.
Or this is what your volunteer hours are doing. And oh, by the way, here's some people that also need your help if you want to provide guidance and support for them since you're a survivor. So.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
So Tony, and sorry to keep taking you down the tech path occasionally.
Well, I am running a technology shop, so
we are the tech show. But I'm obviously just emotionally connected to ACS. But from a technology perspective, so how do you make your technology decisions, right? So you mentioned some of the tech choices that you've made, some of the platform choices, some of the sort of ideas and some of the things that you are planning to have to support these supporter networks, all the key business goals. But from a technology perspective, step back and say, this is my process, or this is our methodology for choosing the right solution provider, choosing the right partner, choosing the right technology for my needs and for the needs of an organization that's as big as ACS.
It's a really big dartboard. No. It's a process. We have a strategic sourcing group within the American Cancer Society that spends a lot of time understanding the market and where people are going, who are they engaging with, and what other companies are doing. But we also get out a lot and go to, I'm actually not an inked Class C customer yet, just full disclosure. But that's why I'm here. Because I want to learn from all of you about what your experience is and where you're going and what you're doing, just as much as I'm standing up here telling you kind of how we're doing our thing. And so we spend a lot of time talking to references, customers, et cetera. We talk a lot of time talking to partners about, like Appirio, about what they're seeing other companies do. We spend a lot of time thinking about what we need as an organization from a technology perspective that will get us, down to not necessarily the finish line, because nobody would have cancer anymore, but at least further down the way, and then, essentially utilize a sourcing strategy that allows us to kind of score the individual vendors in such a way that we now have a built-out ecosystem, as I mentioned before,
right,
of technologies that work together, because it's too easy for you to kind of say, well, let's tackle this problem over here and not think about it again until we tackle this problem over here and realize these two don't connect.
Right.
So we look at it holistically. We look at it as, here's an enterprise corporate problem we have to solve. Entire constituent journey, both from acquisition to their continued life cycle, how do they become a supporter, how do we support them, and then down into how do we handle all the back end financials and whatever else from management perspective that we have to do, and then figure out how that has to work together.
Right. And
that essentially becomes your ecosystem.
Yep.
Right. And then you can plug into it. That's essentially how to do it.
So when we were talking, you were talking about it's somewhat of a best of breed strategy, right? Meaning choosing the solutions that are really best of breed. But it's also and most importantly, it sounded like an integration issue, right? It's how well does a technology work in your ecosystem
and out of the box. So the trick with integration is it needs to be done in a standard way, and you can't overthink it. And to be fair, we American Cancer Society have a long history of over-engineering. We overthink. We think, hey, we're special. We got to do it this way, and I'm sure that other companies do the same. So, but we forcefully held ourselves to a particular standard, and we essentially generated a guiding principle of the project to simplify, standardize, and ensure that the solution was effective and efficient.
Right.
And so, using those tenets, you essentially are able to say, okay, if I'm going to integrate this to this, say Salesforce to NetSuite, I want to do it in a standard way using standard connectors,
Standard technology.
so that I don't have to customize it and maintain a large developer workforce or a third-party developer workforce to keep that maintained.
Right.
So that really means, like I said, it's a business transformational project, right? So we determine how, in what way we had to change our business processes to fit inside of the standards that the tools were allowing for, at least to a certain extent. I mean, there's a point at which you kind of cease to becoming American Cancer Society if you're completely standardized, but there is a certain amount of, just best practice to follow.
Right.
So,
got it. So I'm going to go off-roading for a moment here, right? But we didn't talk about this before, but you're a data guy, right? And at heart, right?
Yeah. That's my background.
Sorry, I don't know if that's a.
No,
that was meant to be like a compliment. Right? And obviously there's this sort of technology ecosystem and a platform, but what do you do about this volume of data that you have to deal with as well, right? So in addition, it's really this problem of 360 degree view is really a data problem at its core.
It is, but there's some ways around that, and not to get too detailed, but okay, so without filter, American Cancer Society has 80 million constituents in its database without filter. And so what I mean by that is this might be people that we have touched over the past 15 years and who may be gone, right? So, so you have to think about that. Okay, clearly I'm not going to throw 80 million people into Salesforce and hope they all show up.
Right.
So what you do is you have to look at who's active, what do I define as an active constituent, and then of those, how much history do I need?
Right.
So for instance, it's very common for you to say something like, what's my lifetime value of that person? What's their lifetime giving amount? What's their recent gift? And then on the fundraising, on the volunteer side, when did they last volunteer and how often? Well, those are current fields. You don't have to contain all of the history of that.
Got it.
So if somebody volunteered 1 year ago but donated 5 years ago, I want those 2 data points, but I don't need the 5-year-old donation transaction. I might want the 1-year-old volunteer transaction so I can understand what they were doing, etc.
Right.
So what you do is you roll up essentially activity summary by person.
Got
and
it.
some of these might be custom fields in Salesforce or whatever, and then what you do is, as transactions flow through the system, you interrogate, okay, do I have a field that I need to update that might be a giving field or an event participation field or something that summarizes a current, what's current about me, but might be older data.
Right.
And so that keeps your data storage low, and so you're not spending extra money to actually allow for that 360 degree view to happen. Now, there's some other technologies you could deploy. So for instance, I could maintain 100% history of those 80 million people elsewhere, connect that up via Lightning Connect or something, make it look like current data, but I'm actually storing it elsewhere.
Storing it somewhere else, right.
And we have plans to do something like that too.
Okay.
Because our marketing group wants to understand long-term lapsed people and see how they could get them back. So they don't have to be on my active data store, but they need to be somewhere.
Right.
So we'll connect those up via external systems and do it that way.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
So another question for you that we didn't really talk about that
You're trying to trip me up.
I'm going to keep little by little as much as I can. So how do you, obviously you have based on all of the groups that you described and all the different constituents and all of the types of people that are involved in this, you have a lot of requests, a lot of people who need stuff. We want this, and I as a marketing person, I'm going to want the world for marketing, right? And I as someone in development, I'm going to need one of everything and then 2 of the other things, right? So how do we together, you and us and everyone in this initiative, how do we keep the right expectations setting right? How do we work together to satisfy the core requirements? How do we not stray off the beaten path and not get too crazy custom out of the gate? Because that's what happens in these big initiatives. And
the trick for me, because everybody wants everything, and even though they may or may not feel like they need it now, they feel like they need it now. And so the trick that I always go back to is, how are you gonna action on that information right away?
Yep.
If I allowed for that to occur, what are you gonna do with it? And if I don't get a good answer, then why do we need it?
Right.
So, but that said, you don't want to stifle innovation. So what you do is you think big, start small, and scale. So capture all of those things.
Okay.
Capture everything that somebody's potentially thinking of, and then start with a base set. Get that baked in and get it useful, and then look at the next requirement and try to determine, okay, now do I still need this? And if so, then sure, figure out how to do that piece. You know, and that way your only variable change is small as you go up the ladder. And there'll be plenty of times where you go, yeah, I don't really need that anymore. Now that I've got this base thing, that thing that I had in my head that I wanted, I don't need anymore.
Didn't really need it.
And like I said, since we've over customized historically, we're actually very shy about wanting to do that today.
Right. Got it. And then do we still have time? We're good? We keep going?
We're at the 10-minute.
10-minute. All right. So a couple more really quick. Is that all right? All right. One last one. Okay. All right. One last one. All right. So the one big question I had is, what about executive leadership and involvement in this, right? So, in some organizations, executives are deeply involved in the process. In others, it's, let sort of the management level folks really make the decisions across the board, and we roll them up, and we'll occasionally be involved in it. What is your approach, and what is executive approach?
Yeah, in this project, so there's an executive sponsorship team of 3 people.
Yeah.
Me, in the CIO role, Catherine Mickle, our CFO, and Mike Neal, who is our EVP of Field Operations.
Right.
And we are deeply involved in this project. And we, so much so that we're kind of scared. I'm actually scared that I'm not in meetings today. But I mean, it's not that we don't trust the people that are closer to it.
Well, this is kind of a meeting.
Yeah. It's just that there's a particular vision that we want to ensure that we continue to have throughout the entire process.
Right.
Because, if somebody is really, really close to a problem, they're going to want to tell your guys, Appirio guys who are on the ground today, their problem as it exists today. And they may not be thinking about how, what the future looks like.
The impact.
And so we want to be there to continually provide, well, this is the vision of why we're doing this, and here's how that fits in the overall context of, what we're doing in the next few iterations. So we're deeply involved. Yeah.
We're good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so
Hopefully
much,
y'all got
Blake.
some insight out of that.
That was awesome. Thanks so much for doing that. We wanted to open up the floor to any Q&A here for these last few minutes. Any questions right now?
Hi, I'm wondering what kind of information technologies you think that a small organization should prioritize. You mentioned that ecosystem, and I would love to have that. So.
Okay. And as a small, are you like 10 people or less or something like that? Or what? Okay. Your customer data is your most important thing. When I say customer, I mean anybody that interacts with you, your constituents, the most important thing. So really, start with Salesforce. It's cheap for a nonprofit. So, and that is actually the core of your ecosystem if you think about it. If you get your constituent data right, in that you've got a single version of the truth, and everything else is kind of an add-on or just a connector, then you're set. It's because, everything else is an integration. Classy, integrate to Salesforce. Financial system, integrate to Salesforce. Data augmentation. So if you only know so much about your supporter and you want to know more, you can buy that. You don't have to ask them many more questions. All of that goes into one record, and that's yours, and that's the most important thing you have. Yep.
So when you think about maintaining a 360-degree view, how do you consider dealing with the transient nature of people, right? Like, so how can you make sure that you're identifying that person as the same person in all these interactions in these disparate systems?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something that what we call unknown to known pathing. So in other words, I might know you as a donor via your email address, but I might know you as a volunteer via your mailing address. And the only thing that might connect them might be your name. So that's tough. And you might actually live in the system in two places for a while until you might go and add your email address to say, a login to my website. Once you do, now I've got your name attached to your email address. I've got your name attached to your mailing address. I can augment that via, say, a data augmentation service that can marry them for me. And then all of a sudden I know you as one person. So then I merge you. But you might live twice in my system for a while. Ideally not long, because at the end of the day, I only want to contact you once if I have to. So same thing with if you are a donor that Kurt is asking to fundraise for him, and you come via his event. So I might only know your name there and not an email address. But typically, I can get a good match with name and email address to any other amount of information that I have for you if I also have your name elsewhere. So name, email, plus name, address, mailing address, I can get a good match off of you right away. Yeah.
Hi, I'm going to go just a little bit off track.
Okay.
I'm interested in your view on donor advised funds and the lack of transparency on the information that flows through those funds and how you're trying to capture that donor information when you don't have that information coming through, and donor advised funds are growing by 30% a year, something like that. So have you thought about that and how you work with those funds?
That's something that actually we haven't had a lot of thought about. What I intend to do is allow for as much information to flow through the system as possible, even if I have to go find it. So in other words, I may not want to ask you, the donor, 50 questions, but I might want to find out about you, the donor, if I have at least one bit of information about you, because ultimately I want to provide that information back to you about where your money went. I guess I'm not sure if that's what you're asking, but it's a direction we want to go. Just haven't had a lot of thought about what to do.
I guess what I'm asking is, if I have an account at a donor advised fund, I can donate to your charity and you won't know who I am.
Oh yeah.
So have you thought about how you reconcile that with the individual donor advised funds? Because it's obviously going to impact the technology and the information that you're gathering.
Yeah, we would have to do that at a summary level, right?
Yeah.
So here is the summary total of all that money that came in. This is what we did with it. And most of that, though, comes into general funds. So the problem you've got there is, like, I might have 10 different programs that goes to, but that's okay. It's, here's where that went. And however, though, if it was more of a restricted fund, like this is just for breast cancer, this is just for colon, then you would know, yeah, it's these grants, it's these programs, etc. That we could do for sure, but it'd be at a summary level. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Any more questions here?
Hi, with the rise of artificial intelligence with things like Einstein and Watson, I'm wondering what insights you think you'll be able to get from these systems.
Okay, so the more I know about what my supporters are doing, the more information that I can feed and teach. That's the key. Teach Einstein. So Einstein's constantly looking, right? And I can talk about what we're doing with Watson elsewhere, because we actually have another project going on with Watson right now. But the more we teach Einstein that connected view, the more that they can help. And I think the best way that they could do that would be to help the agent if the person calls in and asks for help. So Einstein's there in Service Cloud, a person calls in and says, I need the help with this information. They identify themselves. Einstein wakes up and says, well, I know Kurt. Kurt did this, this, and this for me, and search for these documents. So it already knows this information. So the agent can then say to Kurt, hey, there's some updated info that Einstein's telling me you need that you don't have yet. So that's the first place, as I think in the service, cloud. The second thing would be Einstein could help us with marketing. So in other words, and what I really mean by marketing, not just fundraising marketing, but also volunteer attraction, volunteer retention, those things. Because if Einstein knows more about what I like and feeds me info about things that are in my area that I might want to be a part of, the more likely I might just go, well, sure. But if it's feeding me, a bombarding of stuff that has no intelligence behind it, then I might likely just go, no, don't talk to me anymore. Now with Watson, we're doing something very different because it's a targeted project that we're doing with our National Cancer Information Center, and we're teaching Watson the decision tree that the agent is making while they're talking to a cancer patient, and then Watson will then suggest a potential option for the agent to tell the patient, like, oh, well, you haven't looked at this info yet. Here's something that you could look into. These clinical trials are available to you, et cetera. And that saves hours of time that the agent would normally be searching for those things. So that's kind of two separate ideas, but they both fit inside the same ecosystem because the data is the same underneath.
That's very cool.
That's awesome. Too bad we actually have to cut it short now. I feel like we're starting to talk about AI and really cool stuff like that.
Yeah, we got to the cool stuff last.
Yeah, but
it's supposed to be technology. Come on.
This has been awesome, Gene. Thanks so much, Blake. Thank you so much. Classy is super excited to be partnering with you guys. Everyone, thanks so much for joining today, and enjoy the rest of the collaborative. Thanks.
All right, thanks.
Nice job.
Yeah.